Welcome back, Epic Families. It feels like it's been forever, honestly, even though it's only been, like 2 weeks. But welcome back. It's exciting to have you all together again. I hope you've had fun tonight, and I hope you had a great week off if it was your spring break, or if it wasn't, I hope you just had a great week last week and we didn't meet. But one announcement, and that is the last Wednesday of this month, we're going roller skating in place of the Epic Family Reunion. All the times are the same. You're going to show up at the skating rink at normal start time, and it's just, hopefully we can have fun, hang out, roller skate together, and that's in place of the Epic Family Reunion, so just remember that. More details will be out in the emails following and information to your parents, but that's just the one announcement that we have to make. But let's get right into it. So the Sunday, not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before was Easter. This is the first Wednesday since Easter Sunday, and so I thought it'd only be appropriate if we continued on in that same line of the Easter celebration, but I want to pose it in a different way. So if you didn't come to WL on Easter Sunday, it was so exciting gathering together. There was a tent outside, there was 4 different services, it was this huge event, this climax that comes together from weeks and weeks of planning. A lot of people put a lot of energy into it. But we had a great time of fellowship, inside, outside, with food trucks. We came together and worshiped the one who died and rose for our sins. God moved, and it was a great day. It was a great day for even those that had not yet come to know Jesus. And it was a great day for those that already had been believers for a long time. It was awesome fellowship together. But honestly, Easter usually is, isn't it? I mean, maybe besides for last year because we were forced to stay apart, but Easter is almost always awesome. It's always a special time of excitement and celebration. There's always so much that goes into it. And maybe some of you don't do it anymore, but we used to hunt Easter eggs when I was a kid. We used to look for candy. We used to get those big chocolate bunnies of the super cheap chocolate and never end up eating them and then just throwing them away whole. There are pretty clothes to wear on Sunday morning. The whole family matches or wears all their Easter colors, Easter bests. But the question that I pose is, after all of this is over, after the whole Easter shebang, after the whole event happens, what happens on Monday? Monday's right after the Sunday. What happens then? Some of you may have went on vacation or already had been there. Some of you went back home. Some of your parents or your leaders went to work. And then the Easter candy is 75% off, and then it kind of goes away, right? It kind of just, life goes on like it always does. But that happened on the first Easter too. Life went back, life resumed. Maybe they didn't have Easter candy that went 75% off, but life kept going. The Monday came after the Sunday. When Jesus was crucified, all of Jerusalem knew about it. I'm sure there was a buzz. I'm sure there was a lot of excitement happening when he was crucified, and then he was resurrected on the Easter Sunday, if you would. And I'm sure that there was a buzz happening when they found out, or it was rumored that his body wasn't there and that he may actually be alive. But however, like everything sensational that happened in that world and in this one, time keeps going and the buzz starts to fade. In those first few weeks after the resurrection, the world at large continued about their business. Right? Monday came. And in fact, even Jesus' closest followers, those in his inner circle, those that knew him best, they even returned to the lives that they had, to the things that they knew. And we find that in the chapter right after the one that's focused on Easter Sunday, in John 20 is where we focus Easter Sunday, and we're in John 21. And so go ahead and open to John chapter 21, and let's answer the question of what now. Let's answer the what now. What happens on the Monday? What happens that follows Easter? But first, like I always like to do, let's look into a bit of context first. So it had been some time since Jesus had appeared to his disciples at this point. And it appears that they were getting antsy, right? And one of the leading disciples, one of the leaders, is Peter. Peter, the same guy that had denied Jesus 3 times on the night of his arrest and trial. He was a man of action. And if you want to see a great actual visual example of this, there's a show called The Chosen. And though we don't see Peter after Jesus' resurrection, we do see him before, and it paints a great example of Peter and just his continuous action. It's called The Chosen. I encourage you to watch it. There's actually a new season that's just coming out right now, but that's besides the point. Peter was a man of action. It didn't suit him well to just sit around and do nothing and wait. So he decided to get the guys together, get the disciples together, and they would do what they knew, which is fishing. They decided to go fishing. And if Jesus wasn't around to tell them what to do, then they might as well just go back to what they were next best at, right? What they spent the most time doing, which was their job, which was fishing. And it's when they thought the whole resurrection thing was over that Jesus meets them. But before we continue in this story, I want you to think about what was your life like after Easter? What did you do? Did you carry the joy of the truth of the resurrection that we celebrated that Sunday morning into your homes with your siblings and your parents? Did you actively show the love of Jesus' death and resurrection and celebrate like he was raised in your life? Did you do your best in classes? I know it's only been a couple days, but have you done your best in your classes because you serve a living Savior? Did you cry out for help against the fight against sin that is so hard for us to overcome, but desiring to live a God-honoring life because we know that Jesus is alive and died for our sin and defeated death? Does your life show that a resurrection has happened? Does your life show that a resurrection has changed things, or are you living the same that you did before the Easter Sunday? Did you go back to the normal of your life? And if you take one thing away, I want you to take this away. Jesus isn't gone because Easter is over, because the Easter celebration is over. Even though life is still hard and things don't always work out in our timing, Jesus isn't gone because Easter is over. And as we look at the disciples and their desire to turn away, I want you to acknowledge the fact that Jesus is still with you. He is still risen. He is still the conqueror of sin and death. And in these next 2 weeks, we're going to look at two main points. But today we're going to focus on just one. So let's go and read John chapter 21, verses 1 through 3. Read it as your group. It'll help paint where we are, and then go ahead and press play. So this story is so relatable, honestly. It's so relatable because it's the same temptation that we experience and that we face all the time when God doesn't do the things that we want Him to do when we want Him to do it, or when we think He should. As we watch this interaction with Christ, I want to encourage you with the way that God meets us after Easter. I want to challenge you to do what the disciples did, not the turn away part, but the turning to, the coming back to. But first, after Easter, we must recognize His presence. And that's the first point. We must recognize His presence. So I want you to pause and continue reading John chapter 21, verses 4 through 8, and then press play. So the first thing that Peter and the others learned that morning was that Jesus was in fact still around. So think about it with me. Many of these men had been professional fishermen, if you would, before they dropped everything and followed Jesus, right? And it's one thing if you're fishing just to get out on the water for a few hours, but this was their profession. They were fishing all night long, and that would have been so frustrating. And suddenly, a stranger from the shore yells out, "Hey guys, do you have any fish? Do you have any food?" Some Bibles here translate this to friends in chapter 6. But my Bible, the New King James Version, and it actually translates to children. So he literally said, or in chapter 5, he said, Jesus said to them, "Children, have you any food?" So can you imagine how frustrating or annoying this stranger's question must have been? They'd been fishing all night. They were already weary. They were frustrated. They couldn't catch any fish, and this is what they were supposedly best at. How annoying that stranger's question would have been to these guys. Put yourself in Peter's shoes. Remember, Peter had promised Jesus that he'd be willing to die for him. He promised it to him, and then he denied him 3 times. And though Peter did end up dying for Jesus, it wasn't in the timing that he thought. So wouldn't you feel like a failure of a disciple at this point? Wouldn't you feel like man, like, what do I have left? Like, the most important thing in my life I failed at. But now he has gone back to fishing and he can't even do that right. The thing he did the most before he followed Jesus, he couldn't even do it now. But on top of that, he's exhausted and some dude yelling at him from the shore. You guys get it. But doesn't it seem weird that the disciples didn't realize what was happening? They didn't realize that they were talking to Jesus, and after all, they had heard him teach for years, right? That they had heard him give this same type of spiel before, and they had already seen him after the resurrection, so they knew he was alive. But maybe, think about this, maybe the reason that they didn't recognize Jesus on the shore was because they weren't looking for him there, because they didn't expect to see him there. I mean, some people argue maybe Jesus just kept himself from being recognizable to them, like he did with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. But I would pose the thought that maybe they just weren't expecting to see him there. Maybe they just weren't looking for him, and so that's why they didn't see him. But that does bring up the question, though, when was the last time that you actually looked for the presence of God in your daily circumstances, in your Monday circumstance? When did you last pray for something to happen and actually expect it to happen? This is a question that convicts me a lot. And just like the disciples, you might miss him if you aren't there looking. Just like the disciples saw the man on the shore, you might miss him if you aren't looking carefully and expecting him to show up. And in fact, if you and I are going to keep walking in the joy after Easter, we need to recognize that he is here with us. And as your small groups have these conversations, I want you to remember that we need him here to show us the work that we should be doing so we can join him in that work. Anyways, let's keep going in the story. So Jesus goes on to tell them to let their nets down one more time, right? And it's still so funny that they didn't recognize it yet, but he told them to cast their nets out one more time. And for Peter, James, and John, this should have sounded awfully familiar, because we see earlier in Luke 5, we read when Jesus called these men under similar circumstances. They had fished all night long, and at that time, Peter mouthed off to Jesus and told him about his unhappy circumstances. And Jesus' suggestion was that he let out his net one more time. And the catch was so great that Peter couldn't bring it in by himself. He had to call over James and John, and they filled up all their boats together. But this time, Peter didn't mouth off at all. He didn't complain about anything. He just said, you know what? What's the worst that could happen, right? And they just threw it in. And as soon as they started pulling it in, John realized what was happening. John realized, and he knew it was Jesus, and so he told Peter, and Peter, like we said, was the excitable one. He was the one of action. It said that he threw back on his outer garment, since he had removed it, and he plunged into the sea, right? And so Peter saw it, and he jumped into the water, swam to Jesus, leaving the other guys to deal with the fish. So John and Peter recognized, because they knew what Jesus was capable of. So they recognized that it was Jesus, not because they saw the person on the shore, but they saw what he was capable of doing. And it must have refreshed their memory of what they had seen not too long before. And so what's our application? So what does this matter to us? We have to be looking for the things, for the fingerprint of God. We have to be familiar with the things that Jesus does, that God does. And we have to be remembering the things that he had done for us in the past. One great way to do this is to familiarize ourselves, to read the text, to read what Jesus did. Go back and read some of those Bible verses that we read in Vacation Bible School that showed us the attributes, the things of God, the things that he did. They'll make more sense now, I promise, as you've seen the prominence of God in your life. But one other thing that's super helpful for us is to learn the promises God has made, to learn about the things that he said that he would do. And we've talked about these promises. At the last family reunion, we handed out some truths and reminders of promises of the truths that Jesus says that we are. And if tonight, the first Wednesday that we're meeting since Easter, you're living as though he never rose again, if your life hasn't changed, remember his promises. Remember the things that he says that he's going to do and that he's already done in the Bible and also in your life. Look for the signs that he's there with you. Be prepared to see the things that he's doing and actually believe that it'll happen. Look for the signs that he's with you, working, moving, that he's completing his plan in your life. Guys, just like those disciples who knew Jesus best, if you aren't prepared to see him work in you, work through you, work around you, you may be missing him standing, that metaphorical standing on the shore. So remember, Jesus isn't gone because Easter's over. The truth and the relevance in the power of the resurrection is as true right now as it was on that first Easter Sunday. But however, if we're going to see our lives change by that reality, we must continuously recognize his presence. We must continually recognize his presence. Just because Easter's over doesn't mean that Jesus is gone. He's still here. He's with us. He's among us. And this is where we'll end this week. We'll pick up in the same chapter next week, but I'm excited to hear about the conversations that you guys have. We'll see each other soon, I'm sure. I'm excited, and I'm thrilled that you guys are back together. But have a great week, guys. Blessings on you.